Hello, everyone, and welcome to your next episode of MHEDA Talks. I'm your host, Sherry Altergott, CEO of the CX Edge. Well, we have a very special treat for you guys today. We have Pamela Barnum. Now, Pamela has a lot of accolades to her name, and I'm not going to give it all away right now. But the most important one is probably that she'll be speaking at the Emerging Leaders Conference coming up in Chicago in July with MHEDA. But Pamela is a communication expert who specializes in strategies and techniques for increasing trust, improving relationships, and decoding nonverbal cues. So, welcome, Pamela. I can't wait to get into this.
Well, thank you for having me, Sherry. I'm excited as well because I love talking about this topic, so I'm ready to get rolling.
It's amazing. For over 25 years, every survey I've read, every person that works for a company I've talked to, every leader I've talked to, if you ask them what's the number one issue at their organization, it's always communication. No matter what industry, no matter what level you are in the organization, that's what people tend to turn to. So I'm so interested to get your take on it, and how maybe we can work in the future to improve this, and so it doesn't come up as the number one thing all the time. Um, so let's just start like easy. What are some of the most common mistakes you think professionals make in the workplace when it comes to communication?
Well, one is a lack of active listening. I know that phrase active listening is overused, but essentially what I'm speaking about is watching and listening for understanding. And believe it or not, most people aren't able to do both simultaneously very effectively. In fact, in my background working as an investigator, interviewing people, we have the benefit oftentimes of being able to video and replay and watch. And it's remarkable how many things you miss if you're not really watching, and actively listening. So we're watching the body language while we're also listening to the answer. We want to be exhibiting empathy to demonstrate understanding, leaning in, nodding, having that open body language, all things we'll discuss in much more detail in Chicago. But essentially, we want to communicate that you hear the person, you understand them, you see them. And it sounds easy, but in practice, it is challenging because many people have very ineffective nonverbal communication skills. And we all like to think that we're able to do these things very easily, but if we had that magic camera watching all of the time, we'd be able to see some things. It's difficult to look from within and see all of the things happening. So I'm going to discuss several of these points during my keynote, but one that we can talk about here pretty easily, especially in a podcast format, is paralinguistics. So our tone, our cadence, the melody of our voice, the volume. All of these things are critical when it comes to communicating, and that's all a part of the active listening. And then a third point that I want to take a deeper dive into later in Chicago is disrespect. We see that, that is one of the most common communication mistakes that people make, even though they don't really recognize it, because we all want to be respectful. But there are things like interrupting people while they're speaking. We're thinking, I'm a lawyer as well. I'm always thinking, okay, what they're saying, what am I going to say next? And sometimes we interrupt or we're late. We get running behind. We're so overwhelmed. People in the workplace now have so many tasks, so many things happening that we can be late in responding, late showing up. Even the timing of emails can demonstrate respect or a lack of respect. And we can get into that a little bit more when we talk about different modes of communication. But there are so many things that just little tweaks, things that we think we're already doing, we can just make a little bit of a shift, use some tools, and work through those.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, to your point, a lot of times it's things that we don't realize we're doing that are disrespectful.
Yeah.
Even if you're not actively looking at your phone, it's, every time you're watching things or you hear the text message come through, you can almost see the other person kind of side-eyeing it down to the
Yes.
phone to see the message. And I think it's getting in a good habit of just getting rid of as many distractions as you can, which can be hard to do in the world today for sure.
It absolutely is. I'm glad you bring up the mobile devices because I'm going to be speaking about some new research that will blow your mind away when it comes to the actual brain power that we lose, and the disrespect demonstrated in mobile devices, et cetera. So there's some really interesting new research that comes out about that, and I can hardly wait to share it.
Awesome. Um, it's such good tips, and I think the most important thing is a lot of times, and I say this a lot, is people don't know what they're doing, and some of it sounds so simple, but until it's pointed out to you, you don't realize that you're doing some of those things. I grew up kind of in the world of all of my managers were baby boomers, and that generation, a lot of times in the environments I grew up in, it was you have to adapt your communication style to them, right? So if they're the boss, they get to communicate whatever way
Yeah.
they want to, and you got to figure out how to make it work. I will say very early on in my career when I was a new manager, those were big mistakes that I made was kind of thinking the same thing was, okay, well, this is my style and
Yeah.
other people are going to adapt to it. And it wasn't until I matured in my roles and got a little bit older that I really
Yeah.
started to recognize the need for changing and adapting based on different people's communication styles. But that can be really hard to do because you need to know what their communication style
Yeah.
is to adapt it. So, how do you suggest to people to go about that?
There are some great tools. I don't teach on these tools. I don't share expertise on these tools, but I embrace them. So identifying personality types, Myers-Briggs or DISC, et cetera, those different types of personality tests. A lot of workplaces, a lot of professionals are now using those within their teams, and that helps you identify that person's communication style. That's something that, when I was working in my previous career as undercover drug enforcement officer, I didn't take those tests and I didn't give drug dealers, the Myers Briggs, but I would watch for things that they were doing that would help me lean into their communication style. Are they really extrovert? Are they giving me a lot of feedback, a lot of information? Are they making a lot of large movements? Are they really exaggerating? All of the different things would tune me into how they like to be communicated to so that I could adjust my tone and pace to match them. And also, this is something that you may not think it was applicable to my former lives, but it absolutely was. And that was looking for feedback. So encouraging open dialogue, asking for that feedback to be specific with open-ended questions. So, quick example in the professional world, because I don't think a lot of the audience are out there looking to deal with bikers and drug dealers, but within teams, et cetera, how can I enhance my performance in this project? So very open-ended, but specific to that level of context, and then follow up with that. So when you get that feedback, follow up with how you've responded, look for more feedback. And then lastly, I think showing gratitude and acknowledging the person's effort in providing that feedback is huge. That really takes things to a positive level, whether you're receiving constructive feedback or praise, whatever that is, lack of praise. Being grateful for that and expressing gratitude to that person helps take that relationship to the next level.
Yeah, I totally agree. Great points. Um, I think we live in a world that has slowly become more digitized, and then
Uh,
we went through this really sped up approach to digitizing communication
yeah.
once COVID hit, especially as it relates to Zoom meetings and working from home. And I think the work environment changed a lot.
Yeah.
So what have you seen of the changes in communication as we move to an even more digitized world?
So I think, on the positive, we see increased accessibility, obviously, flexibility. There's the convenience, time zones are no longer relevant with, Slack or email locations. It makes it very easy to communicate, more accessible. However, it's also so much more intrusive. I was recently doing a conference for a large organization, and we had quite an interesting discussion around email, for example, the timing of email. Some people feel completely disrespected if the person that is communicating with them, especially someone that they direct report to, that's in the same time zone, and they're sending them emails and requests late into the evening or outside of work hours. It has a different type of impact that, maybe we just want to get it off of our plate. So then we're pushing it over, and it can feel a little bit intrusive. So again, it's all relative and contextual. It depends on that relationship. Clearly, time zones make that challenging. It's also really difficult to build rapport and establish trust. There are a lot of nonverbal things that we can do digitally. However, when we don't have those nonverbal cues and those I'll give you a quick example: informal interactions. We see that people that are doing things over virtual meetings, oftentimes you get into that virtual meeting and you just want to deal with the matter at hand. Okay, I've got a million things. I'm also checking my email over here. I'm doing this over here. Maybe if I'm working from home, I have 6 other things happening over here. And I don't want to ask you, how was your weekend? Or did you enjoy that vacation you went on? Or how did your child do at their most recent game? All of those things that we do in person around that proverbial water cooler or coffee maker. We have those informal interactions that go a long way in building and establishing trust and building rapport. We don't have that as much digitally. And again, just to emphasize the blurring of that work life balance that happens when there are so many inputs happening. It can feel at times very overwhelming, which makes us a little bit less patient, less willing to engage. So there are negatives. I think we have to really work hard to emphasize the positives and make a way to compensate for some of those challenges.
Yeah, I think with all the ease it's given our lives and maybe some more efficiency in a lot of other areas,
Yes.
I think it's that you never get something for nothing and you're giving up something
Yes.
by having those. I talked to a friend recently and their company uses an AI tool for emails. And I said at a certain point, they're using AI to write an email, and the person that's responding to them is using AI to write an email.
Hmm.
So neither one of their real voices and tones get through uh, because it's
Yes.
just an AI generated email. So my background's in marketing. I love AI. I use it consistently, but I also think that it doesn't belong in every place of our lives, and especially when you're dealing with communication. I think a lot of times it can have a negative impact if it's
Yeah,
used in the wrong way. So I
I
totally.
agree.
Um, so let's talk about one of the areas that I know comes up a lot, and I hear a lot of people always say, "Well, I'm conflict adverse," and my response to that is always, "I think most people are conflict adverse. Not everybody. Some people thrive in it, but the majority of people, I don't think, enjoy conflict, and I think that leads to a lot of communication breakdowns because they're avoiding maybe having some of those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
So, how do you approach communication in a conflict situation to ensure that there's a productive outcome from that?
Well, having worked as a police officer, dealing with all sorts of people, I only showed up in conflict situations usually. No one ever calls the police to come when everybody's happy or having a picnic. They call when there's conflict and challenges. And one of the things, I didn't learn this in my training, but I was fortunate to have a mentor that shared this strategy with me, and it's remarkable. And there's so much science to back it up. And one, we want to stay calm and composed, obviously, but how do we do some of that? Well, box breathing is one of those things. And I'm definitely, not that person to get out and share these types of tactics usually. But just breathing in for 4 or 5 seconds, holding it for a couple, breathing out, not as though you're at a yoga class. We don't want to make it so obvious, it has to be subtle. It helps us remain composed and slows down some of the anxiety. The benefit of this, if you're doing it in person, especially, is that a person will mirror that. So you can de escalate simply with your body language, remaining open, having that open body language, remaining still, being upright, doing the breathing. All of that will start to help calm down. Now, clearly, there are going to be scenarios where the person is so far into their own drama or negativity that this may not be effective. However, it's a great place to start. And then we want to focus on interests, not positions. So when we prepare, when we know our stuff, we can identify the needs of both parties, especially in negotiations. And I encourage people, especially when I teach about negotiations, don't get stuck on specific demands. We want to open up with communicating on some common ground, building that rapport. There's actual research that shows if we spend the first few minutes in any negotiation talking about something that has nothing to do with the issue at hand, it goes a lot further in getting more of what we want. We're establishing that rapport, we're gaining that ground, we're exhibiting empathy. And then we also just want to remain very respectful while setting boundaries. So I encourage people to be willing to reschedule this conversation if that productive outcome doesn't seem to be possible in that moment. Walking out in a huff, going silent, those things don't work. We want to reschedule, we want to come back, we want to circle back and just make that available so that nobody's losing in that moment. We're just taking a moment to regroup and come back.
Yeah. That's a great tip. And I think a lot of conflict could be resolved by taking a little bit of a break
Yeah.
sometimes. We get so kind of in the moment. And I think that's when a lot of people say things that
Yes.
aren't productive, or maybe that they don't even really mean. They're just kind of caught up in the heat of
Exactly.
all of it. Perfect. Um, so what communication trends or tools should we be paying attention to right now? I mean, every day there's a new product, there's a new email,
Hmm.
there's a new type of thing we can use to communicate. I've sat through strategic planning meetings where there's literally the CEO has a list of different types of tools they've heard
Yeah.
about or read about. So, what should people in leadership positions be looking at to implement within their organization?
Well, again, there are a lot of experts on this area of AI powered communication tools. Clearly, I think they change as quickly as anything else. I wake up, I have a new email from someone trying to sell me something or to make my presentations more immersive with virtual reality or augmented reality and help meetings, etc. All of that is wonderful. Outside of my particular wheelhouse, I like to focus on that nonverbal communication that oftentimes we think we are engaged in, and more times than not, we're struggling with, especially since AI, AR, VR are becoming even more prevalent. So humans still respond best to emotional connection. So working on our own self awareness and our emotional intelligence is huge. I know we can spend hours taking a deep dive into all of those tools, as you mentioned. People bring lists of them to meetings, but I think if we circle back and try to spend an equal amount of time on elevating our emotional intelligence, and that includes empathy, trust really exists at the crossroads of strength and warmth. So strength being that confidence, the competence that we have within our own positions, using that and tempering it equally with that emotional connections, empathy, warmth, connection, and taking all of those things and applying that cultural and social nuances that again change the dynamics because we are in such a global atmosphere now. People from all over the world are moving to within literally our own backyard, so we're learning real time firsthand with our neighbors, the people we work with, but also those connections that we're making with people across the globe within our company. So we want to be aware and sensitive, and also acknowledging that that human connection is really universal, leaning in, nodding along, showing that we are confident in the moment by keeping our body language open, either neutral expression or a smile if it's appropriate. Eye contact, very culturally specific, so we can't apply that across the board. But we want to make those connections. Our brains recognize instantly within 1/10 of 1 second when something isn't right. I'll give you a quick example in the virtual world. If we're doing a virtual meeting and people use the blurred background or the virtual background, what happens when they don't have appropriate lighting from behind and in the front? So the professional lighting, their hair disappears, their fingers disappear. And even though we know, oh, they have a virtual background or they just blurred it out or whatever's going on back there, our brain says there's something not right here. This doesn't make sense. And so now we are actively searching for something else that doesn't make sense, something also that we don't trust. What else is going on back there? Our subconscious is wondering. So if we want to establish trust, we want to make sure that we are as transparent, both literally and figuratively, as we can be, both in person and virtually.
That is such a great point because I definitely do that when people are using virtual backgrounds, and I
Yeah.
don't think I
Mhm.
connected those dots, but that makes a lot of sense. I'm always like,
Yeah.
"Well, where are they?"
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
They're not
And
in Ibiza, like, their background.
Exactly. And you're thinking, and you're like, oh, it's fine. Consciously, you're like, oh, I get it. But subconsciously,
Right.
your brain's like, hold on a second here. Now I'm looking for other things that don't add up here. And if we're in a meeting with someone, do we want them looking for things that don't add up, or do we want them to connect with us? And, frankly, at this point, we've all had 3, 5 years, whatever, to clear out those 50 Shades of Grey collections we've got going on, or whatever we've got in that little space behind us. We can curate a little piece of our office or home to just message to people that we are in this meeting and we are engaged and ready to go.
That's such a good point. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Pamela, I know you're not that familiar with MHEDA Talks yet, but we do a little lightning round, and I would like to congratulate you first on making it to the lightning round. Not everybody does. I'm just
Great.
joking. Wait, wait. So I have five quick questions just for us
Yeah.
to get to know you a little
Yeah.
bit better, and for
Great.
people attending the conference to know a little bit more about you. So my first question is, are you ready to enter the lightning round?
I'm ready. I'm
All right,
ready.
here we go. I like to start off easy. Um, what is your communication pet peeve?
People that interrupt and only make it about them. I could give you a really quick example. I was on a flight from Los Angeles to Houston. I got on the plane, how you put your luggage above and you get seated. And just as I'm buckling my seatbelt, I have the aisle seat, the woman in the window seat. I asked her, traveling for business or for pleasure. She talked from that moment until we literally were taxiing, and that, the beep beep, you can take your seatbelt off. I took it off. I jumped up like I was, just trying to save my life. And she gave me her card and said, people never talk like this anymore. I feel like we've known each other forever. She didn't know my name, where I was, nothing. So that's a pet peeve, is people not being aware enough to try to at least get a little bit of interaction going.
Yeah, it has to be mutually beneficial, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there before. I get it. What is your spirit animal and why?
I would think it is a bear. I live in the Rocky Mountains and we are inundated with grizzlies and black bears. And they are such an interesting creature that they're communal for a bit and then they're more on their own. I like that strength, and that they're also all around oftentimes and paying very close attention to their environment. So I would say a bear.
I like that. What is your favorite app that you can't live without?
Calendly, believe it or not, Calendly, because it allows, and back in the day, I'd be like, okay, here are my times. Are you available? Then here are my times, and you're spending so much time. Now everyone has, okay, now here's the times you can connect. I love that app.
I agree. I was late to the party on that one. I just signed up like a year ago, and I totally agree. It has saved hours of time.
Hours. Yeah,
Hours.
and there's many others. That's just the one I'm familiar with. I know there are a lot of other scheduling apps. I just think a scheduling app is so critical.
I totally agree. What is one food that you absolutely refuse to eat?
Eggplant. I
Eggplant.
just do not love the texture. And, my husband loves eggplant parmesan, and I've tried, I just can't do it.
Fair. What is one word or phrase that should be banned from corporate speak?
Just.
Just,
I
yeah.
just thought about this. I'm just reaching out. So we're diminishing our power when we use that word. I could name a million, but that's one that stands out to me when I see it in an email. I just wanted to reach out. I just wanted to check in. And we're taking away some of our power. The other one is sorry, unless it's really legitimate. I think oftentimes we think if we don't respond right away, we have to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was doing this," as opposed to replacing it with, "I appreciate your patience." So
Yes.
that's acknowledging them without taking away your own power. So I'm all about keeping our power and making it mutually beneficial.
I could not agree more. Sorry is definitely on the top of my list.
Yeah.
Well, you successfully made it through our lightning round. Thank you for
Thank
playing.
you.
And sadly, we've come to the end of our podcast, but everybody's gonna get the chance to see you July 23rd and July 24th in Chicago at the Emerging Leaders Conference. To sign up, you just have to go to MHEDA.org. All the information's on the website. Still plenty of time to do that and get your room. Come and see Pamela. Pamela, is there any words of wisdom or any closing thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with in advance of the conference?
Well, I'm excited to see them, and I will just let you know that I'm going to be doing an exercise with the group. It's sort of like my own version of a lightning round, and I will share that I've played it with former FBI agents, lawyers, doctors, salespeople, you name it. Nobody makes it through all 10 questions. So I'm putting the challenge out there, and I bring a prize.
Ooh.
So I'm gonna leave it there.
This is a pretty competitive group. I know quite a few people in this group, and I think they might give you a run for your money for sure.
I'm excited. Hey, I will eat my words if someone gets to the end. So we'll see how it goes.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much of spending some time with us in advance of the conference. I know we're all looking forward to seeing you live and in person and get to dive deeper into a lot of these topics we talked about today. So thank you again, and we'll be seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been MHEDA Talks. I'm your host, Sherry Altergott. We'll see you next time.